Thank you, everyone. Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm Steve Revill from RISC OS Open. I think most of you probably know me. A lot of you are regulars to the RISC OS shows around the country, so you'll have heard some of my talks recently. I've tried not to put too much stuff in here that I've already said, so at least I'm not repeating myself too much for those of you who are familiar with the topic. And for everyone else, welcome. I hope anyone here who's new to RISC OS is enjoying coming and seeing it and finding out about it. It's great to have new people coming into the community and trying it out. So can everyone hear me, or do I need to project more? Is this okay?
Yeah.
Good. Right, I have 34 minutes, so I feel we'll be good. I'll talk to you briefly about what we've got today on the stands that we haven't had at previous shows. There's a few things that have changed, but not necessarily that exciting for most users. One thing I'll talk about is 64-bit BBC Basic is one of the activities that has come out of this Moonshots initiative that we're doing, and I'll talk more about the Moonshot later. But one of the points of this work is we had a private donation from an individual that allowed me to stop doing a paid job for a while and just work on this for about 9 months. I basically took it to a working prototype of a version of BBC Basic written in C, which basically means once you've got this, you can use a thing called a compiler. You can make this run on all sorts of different ARM chips very easily, whereas the current version of BBC Basic is written in very tightly written ARM assembler, which is very hard to make run on modern ARM chips, if not impossible. And one of the benefits here is that even for people with existing RISC OS machines, they can run this version of Basic on it, and they can get new language features that come with this new version of Basic, including 64-bit integers, which is something that's new. So I think one of the things that this is trying to demonstrate is that even though the whole process of what we're trying to do with Moonshots that RISC OS Open are kind of promoting it's a multi-year, probably decades-long task. You can get incremental steps along the way that are really useful for a lot of people in the community, and they don't need that future platform in order for them to be valuable. So this is something I can demonstrate to people who are interested. I can talk to you about where it's got to, what it needs to finish. I think what it needs to finish is more donations so that I can take more time off work and finish the project. Because at the moment I've had to go back to paid work and kind of down tools on this. So hopefully I'll be able to resume this and we can get it finished and into RISC OS in the near future. One of the other side effects that came out of this is you'll see on the stand I've got a copy of the basic reference manual that is full of marks and scribbles and red ink from me and the odd swear word. Where I was writing this code and I was reading the manual, I was treating this as the truth of what RISC OS BBC Basic is. And I was finding all of the issues in this manual, things that are hard to understand, things that are wrong, things that are missing. And so I've gone through and I've done a new version of this manual, so we've just published issue 4 of the Basic Reference Manual. It's coming back from the printers at the moment, so we are selling this on the stand, and anyone who buys this at the show today will post it to you free as soon as we get the printed copies. So this is just another side effect of that piece of work, is that it's taken this book that's a very useful reference guide for anyone who writes basic programs, and we've made it better. Another thing on the stand is a new version of our development tools, which is, again, this is useful for people who write software. And there's a lot of detail here about what's changed, but one of the headlines is we've introduced Fortran 77, which is a language that many people will have used in the past. You have to wear corduroy flares and have a massive collar in order to write Fortran 77. So when you use this compiler and test it, you need to get changed into your flares. But actually, I joke, if you look at Intel's website, if you look at NVIDIA's website, they still recommend for a lot of HPC, a lot of types of coding today, you write those things in Fortran 77. It's actually a really good language for certain types of maths and scientific problems. And 77 is like the latest iteration of that language. There was a later version in 2000 that kind of reinvented it, but it's not very popular. So yes, this is a big feature. It's taken a lot of work, and hopefully people will see some value in it. There's some interesting bits that come out of this. There is a user group called the RISC OS Fortran Friends. So anyone who's interested in learning about Fortran or having a play, there are friendly people in the RISC OS community that can help. And you can even interlink Fortran code with C code, and you can join it together in one big program if you want. So you can choose the right language for the right bits of the problem you're trying to solve. I will skip on a little bit to the compiler itself, because this is the big thing that's changed. There's a tool called the compiler, and it's a key part of the development environment, and it's split into separate components that are all quite isolated from each other. And what we've done is it's already supporting a language called C that's very popular. We've added Fortran, and we're aiming to put C++ in it next. And eventually one day when Rob retires, and he's got lots of time, he'll probably do Pascal. But the downside of Pascal is there is some source code. There was some source code that Acorn had for Pascal for the compiler, but it's long since been lost, and we cannot find it anywhere. So we're going to have to do that again from scratch, which is a bit sad. And at the other end of the compiler, there's the bit that generates the code. At the moment, it generates for ARM, traditional like the titanium board or the Raspberry Pi. What we would like to do is add ARM 64-bit support as well, so that's next on the plan. So we can use the compiler to generate code that runs on the next generation of ARM chips. So the good thing about the compiler is the way it's written is we can add these different bits without having to rewrite the whole compiler every time. And if there's any people out there who have got experience of working on compilers, get in touch with us, because you can probably help accelerate this plan. Okay, so the bounties on our website, we have a number of bounties running, and we have a number of bounties that the community are generously sponsoring and donating into. I'll give you a quick update on how they're going. So the file system update has stalled, and that's unfortunate. The developer who's working on it, their life has taken over. There's personal reasons, there's work reasons, but they've had to ask to pause for a while now. So hopefully at some point they will become available again and we can resume that. But it does mean it's not making any progress. Paint is making really good progress, and I'll talk about that in a minute. This one is also making progress. It was stalled for a while, but what we did was we spoke to a company, a consultancy in Cambridge, who we know some of the people there, and they very generously volunteered one of their engineers, who is a previous RISC OS user from his past, and said anytime he's got downtime where he's not doing paid work, he can work on that. So he's progressing that bounty for us. This one's also making good progress, so this one's also useful to developers. And the programmer's reference manuals, these big 5 manuals that are really useful for the RISC OS interface documentation. We're in the process of merging those 5 down to 4, because the way Acorn published them, it wrote 4 volumes, and then they just sent out a 5th volume that said, by the way, here's all the stuff that's wrong or missing in the first 4. It's a separate book. And then they did an appendix which had even more stuff that was wrong in that book as well. So if you want to understand all the interfaces, you have to read all of them, and then kind of you're reading the ones that are correcting everything and the ones correcting those as well. So it's quite complicated. So what we want to do is merge all that together so that you only have one set of truth. So that's happening, and this one is slowly making progress as well. So I talked about Paint. I've got a little video. Hopefully we can run this. I'll show you one of the latest features in Paint. Is it going to do anything? Yes. So we loaded JPEG into Paint. That's fairly new. One of the things that you've been able to do in Paint forever is you can put some text on top of the image. So we'll just give you a quick demo. We're putting some text on top of the image. Nothing exciting here. And that's about the limit of what Paint has always been able to do. But what we're doing here is we're choosing a different font. And that seems not particularly radical for most painting programs in the world, but for Paint it's a huge step forward. That you can finally write text on an image in one of the outline fonts. Hey, right, celebration there. It's actually not in the system font. And the other thing you'll notice here is the blending as well, so it's doing proper font blending onto the background. So Paint is moving on. That's just one of the many features that have been added to Paint. One of the next things is undo, so you can undo and redo, which is something we would all love to see in Paint. And then the other bounties, these ones are just collecting at the moment, so they're not in progress. And again, if you see these percentages over 100%, the only thing that means is we guess what's the minimum possible amount of money someone might want to be paid to do these things. And we've reached that threshold for some of them of the minimum possible. But realistically, they're probably not enough for anyone to actually want to claim them. Although I'm tempted by this one. I do feel like I'd like to do this one. And I might swing back to that. So on to the moonshots. I've mentioned the moonshots. You've probably seen if you walk by our stand, we've got the banners up with the moonshot on it. For those of you who don't know, I'll just explain the why behind it. So very briefly, if you look at ARM's website and you look at the different processor architectures that they sell and support, the list of processors that support RISC OS is getting smaller and smaller. And so everyone who's building things like Raspberry Pi, building new computers, they're typically starting to use processors that RISC OS can't run on. And that's because fundamentally the architecture of the processor has changed. So RISC OS is not easy to move from what ARM was doing to what ARM is doing now. It's a lot of work. And we estimated, crudely speaking, if you had a team of 10 people working on it full time, you could probably crack the problem in a few years. But 10 people for like 3 years is 30 man years. It's a lot of money. And hence, when we launched the moonshots, we did say, if you wanted to pay commercial rates, it's a few £1 million of development. But what we really want to do is get incremental steps towards that, and hopefully make sure that each incremental step is actually useful and valuable to people. And that way, to a certain degree, it doesn't really matter how far you get, if you reach the ultimate goal or not, at least you've delivered some value along the way. So there is sometimes a bit of confusion about RISC OS Open's role in this. What do we do, what don't we do? So I will just touch on that. So where are we focusing? We're looking to raise awareness of this issue more outside the community than within the RISC OS community, because everyone in the RISC OS community mostly has already heard about this and understands the importance of it. And everyone in the community already very generously supports our bounty scheme, other people in the RISC OS community buying their products and supporting what they do. So I think within the community, everyone's doing almost as much as they can already. So if we need an extra injection of help, typically it's going to have to come from outside. So that's where we're focusing on raising awareness. We're looking for where we can find funding, because again, there's a lot you can do within a community just off people's goodwill and people working in their spare time and people having their own pet projects, and that contributes to the whole. But there's a lot more you can do when you can just build a team and run it full time. So you have to pay those people because they have bills to pay. So if we can find funding opportunities that are significantly larger, then we've got hope of doing that, just that. Even so, we're also looking for like smaller figures. So I said, if you wanted to do the whole thing, this could be millions of pounds. You can get some of the incremental steps in like tens of thousands of pounds. And that's a lot closer to our existing bounties. So we can make strides forwards. Like basic, finishing basic, I estimated was about 25,000. And that's enough for me to say, I'd stop work for 6 months and maybe 9 months, some do that. And I'd quite enjoy doing that, but there's a lot of other bits and pieces where we could find another developer and they might be willing to give up 6 months to do some work like this. So fundraising is a very important part of what we're doing. We're also just reaching out to people and saying, are you a developer? Are you someone who can help mentor? Are you someone who could help project manage? If we did find the funding, who's going to help with project management? Who's going to help with teaching people about RISC OS? Who's going to help with teaching people about good software engineering principles? You might not want to have the time to do the actual development, but you might be willing to put in a bit of time to advise some developers. So we're looking for people who can help on all of these axes. So we're also keeping an eye on what's going on in the community, because there's people making useful steps forward on this on their own. So they're doing great things in and around RISC OS. So we're also keeping an eye on those and seeing if there's ways for collaboration, if there's ways they could converge in the future. The moonshots don't have to exist in a vacuum. I think they very much have to recognise the reality of where RISC OS is and where the other things around RISC OS are, and see how we can leverage those. We are chasing about 75 different leads at the moment, so you can imagine that's most of our time is just going through our list of leads, finding out the next best way to get hold of that person and chasing them up, and then trying to decide how they can help us, if they want to help us, if they've got someone else that they recommend that we speak to. So following all these leads is quite a lot of what we do. And this is just the final point. This has been mentioned on the forums by certain people that why would someone invest a significant sum in RISC OS Open when it's just a private limited company? It feels very opaque. But why would you just give them, tens of thousands of pounds? How do you know what they're going to do? So we're speaking to people at the moment as well about creating a charitable trust. So create a charity and run it as a charity, like the Cambridge Computing Museum is a charity. If we can do this as a registered charity, it becomes a lot more transparent, and then you've got proper audited accounts, and people feel a lot more comfortable putting money into it, knowing there's a very clear objective and mandate. And there are some people that we're speaking to as well about grant funding, exploring all the opportunities. We've got some people who are experts in grant funding who are helping to advise. So there's a lot of different avenues, but that also leads over to where we're not spending our time. So we're not spending our time very deliberately on all of the technical side of 64-bitting RISC OS. We're not writing detailed roadmaps, and we're not writing API specifications, and we're not refining how it's going to work, because there are so many different ways you could slice this, and there's so many different paths towards that eventual goal, that any work we do now, I have first-hand experience this in my career many times. If you put loads of work up front into all the detail, someone who comes along with all the money and funds it, and a team of people with certain experience, will have their own ideas of what they want, and they could easily reshape it straight away and say, well, no, actually, we want it to be like this. And then you throw all that work away that you did on planning. So we don't see a great deal of value in doing this now, because we know, unless we've got a path to translating the ideas into action, there's not much point defining all this detail, because it's an awful lot of work. I'd rather spend that work trying to find a more concrete path to action before doing this. So I just wanted to make that quite clear. So, what do we want? And I said there's lots of different things going on in and around the community that are around the future of RISC OS, what shape it might be, how it might be implemented. We have in Raw, based on our background, a lot of us worked in and around Acorn back in the day, and we've been around RISC OS our whole careers, even before that. And we know what we like, but it doesn't mean that's what the future of RISC OS is going to be, but this is what we would like it to be. So we would like it to run natively on RISC OS, on ARM chips. So we don't want it to run under emulation, ideally. So if we can avoid emulation, we will. And that basically means, emulation just means you have a whole software layer underneath pretending to be a certain type of hardware, and then RISC OS doesn't know what it's running on. And I think there's a lot of downsides to doing that. So it can't truly describe itself as an operating system if it can't run bare metal on some hardware. We want it ideally to support all the software that people are used to running on their RISC OS platform. We don't want the shift to 64-bit to suddenly come with it. I can't use all the stuff that I used to use. So I think that's an important part of the existing community needs to be able to carry on using it without having to learn it all again. I think a lot of what RISC OS is written in at the moment, which is handcrafted ARM code, needs to be replaced with something higher level. So ideally, something like C. That makes it easier to understand, easier to maintain, easier to find developers to work on it, and it also makes it easier to port between different platforms. And then I think we should fix a few fundamental issues in RISC OS. So they are technical, but there are various weaknesses in RISC OS that make it seem a bit more like an old-fashioned basic operating system than more modern operating systems. And there's things around security and memory management and perhaps multitasking where RISC OS is particularly weak. So I think if you're doing something fairly big with RISC OS, you've got an opportunity to try and tackle those things. How we tackle them is an open question, but it's worth looking at. And finally, it's nice to have the tool chain to be able to build RISC OS run within RISC OS itself. So we would like ideally not to have to build RISC OS on one platform in order to get RISC OS running. On our stand, we have a backdrop. The image looks a bit like this, and it's just an illustration. It says, yes, there's a big journey to get to the endpoint where RISC OS can run natively on 64-bit ARMs, but there's many paths. Some of them can be run in parallel, so people can be doing things in parallel with each other independently, and there's lots of ways you can slice it up into smaller chunks, and each chunk can potentially deliver some value. So there's no one right answer, and it's not an all or nothing. It's a thing that's incremental stages. So that's really what that illustration is showing. And finally, I'm just going to touch on looking around the community. There are various other efforts and projects that people are working on or have worked on in the past. And they all touch on how do you make RISC OS work on other platforms, or what does the future of RISC OS look like? And I think it's worth calling some of these out. One of them is something I think RISC OS developments are using some version of the RISC OS on Linux to get RISC OS running to some degree on a Raspberry Pi 5, which is a useful stepping stone. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's a good interim measure, but it doesn't solve the 64-bit problem. But it's still a handy piece of work. RPCMU, a lot of people will be familiar with the emulator. It means you can run RISC OS in a window on a Windows system or a Linux or a Mac OS system. I think we've got Jeff here today. No, we haven't got Charles here today. So Pyromaniac is an attempt at writing a RISC OS inspired system in Python. We do have Paolo here today, don't we? So Paolo is writing a version of the bottom level of RISC OS called kernel and hardware abstraction layer in a different language called Rust. And the idea is that potentially RISC OS itself can run on top of that, almost unchanged. And that might be another interesting path that the moonshots take. Maybe that's another way we could get to the ultimate goal, and it could indeed be a good path forward. And then here there's another project which is me working on BASIC. There's another thing that's going on to translate it into C. All of these are parts of a bigger picture, which is how do we make RISC OS work on more hardware than it currently can. So before I wrap, I've got 11 minutes. I'm just going to talk about the next version of RISC OS, give you a quick heads up. The next version of stable version of RISC OS, we're currently aiming to release it maybe around the second half of next year. And the sorts of things that we're hoping to get in there, we want a tool that for people who are running it for the first time have the choice of either set it up all the way I'm used to setting RISC OS up because I've used it a million times before, or I've never used RISC OS before. Just talk me through the main options, so you can get RISC OS up and running nice and easily if you're a new user. And I think that really will help bring more people into the community if they have a low barrier to entry. We're going to have the updated paint, so that bounty should be finished by then. I'm hoping if we can get a bit more sponsorship, we can get basic rewritten in C into RISC OS 5.32. We've got a thing that moves the icon bar, so all the drives become on the other side and applications will become on the left. And for people who are more familiar with other operating systems, that might be easier for them to cope with. So that could be one of the things that they get asked in the setup wizard. For people who use RISC OS all their lives, they're probably going to want to keep it the way it is. Light and dark themes, we're hoping to have that all sorted out and finished and in RISC OS 5.32. And there's also this just a little feature, anywhere there's a password box in the window manager where you typically type and it replaces it with dots, you'll have the little button where you can reveal what the password says. And there'll be more things, but they're just a few highlights of things that we're pretty sure are going to make it into the next version of RISC OS. And with that, that's everything. So, any questions? Hello.
When you're talking about the icon bar flip, is that a choice or it will be as?
No, we're going to roll it out. Mandatory for everyone.
Right.
No. The default will be to be the way RISC OS has always been.
Yeah.
And there'll be a new option in Clean Configure where you can say, actually, I want them the other way around.
Yeah.
Any chance you could put it up the side like Windows 10 did? Because people with wide screens are using documents all the time, would prefer to get it out of the way so they can use the full height of the screen. Would that be possible?
I'm sure it's possible. I don't think anyone's working on it, but yes, we could add it to the feature requests. Yeah. Hello.
I think the comments about looking at charitable trusts or charitable states, I think that's actually possibly a really good move. And it will open up opportunity for lottery funding and so lots and lots of potential funding streams there. So I'd be interested to see that pursued. I think that's a really logical step forward.
Yeah, so I'm a member of a sports club and they're a charity, registered charity, and Cambridge Computer Museum is a registered charity. We know the guy there. So we're speaking to various people to find out how onerous it would be, and what the technicalities would be to do it. But I think it's a bit chicken and egg. It's hard for us to justify taking on the burden of doing it if we haven't found some funding to help justify its existence.
So I am involved in some charitable trusts.
Yeah.
It's not that burdensome if you keep it simple, and I think that's always the mission. You know, there are legal obligations, the certain roles that you have to have fulfilled, and you do have to do your annual reports. But actually, I don't think it's as burdensome as people sometimes make out. If you keep it simple.
Good. Well, thank you for that. So yeah, I think it definitely. I think it could make quite a big difference to the ability to actually raise funding, because at the moment I would feel nervous as an investor seeing some random limited company say, please give us loads of money. We promise to spend it on this. Yeah.
Of course, if you are a charity, and people give you money, you can claim that's the tax they would have paid on that money.
So that's sorry, yes, you've raised a very important point that I forgot to mention, is that we can take a certain amount of investment and we can definitely spend that within a year. So if someone gave us 50 grand, we could find some developers and do a load of work and spend it. And then in our end of year tax return, fine, it's kind of all netted out. But if someone starts investing more significant sums in any of this stuff, then we could get to a point where Rule can't spend all that, and then it looks like profit, and then we pay 20% tax on it. And it's just wasted.
Not if you're a charity, you don't.
Yeah, exactly. So if we're a charity, that goes away. But if we're not a charity, if we're in our current structure as a limited company, then that's just wasted donation.
If the money comes in and then is used within RISC OS,
Yes.
can you claim non-profit making charitable status?
Difficult.
Yeah, because it's probably used. Somebody's going to get money out of it, then it's not non-profit making anymore.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
it?
It's in its current structure, we're as tax efficient as we can be, but we're a limited company still. So if we ended up getting more money coming in the year than we were able to spend on doing things with it, then all of that ends up being profit that gets taxed.
Yeah, but the jazz club I run has got loads of money, but we say, yeah, but that's wired over for next year because we're going to need that to do.
Yeah.
So we still appear to be non-profit making.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't tell the tax one.
I've heard a couple of them. One is that charity can perfectly well spend money in pursuit of its objectives.
Yes.
And the other one, I'm a trustee of a charity that converted from being unincorporated to being a charitable incorporated organisation a few years ago. But the Charity Commission give you a specimen constitution,
Right.
and then you look at that and you say, well, that's completely irrelevant to what we do. We need to add something about so and so. We need to clarify. You basically hack their specimen about to suit what you're going to do. It's not really difficult.
That's good. I'm feeling reassured.
But since you're a limited company, you would also be you'd be a charity limited by, presumably OS is limited by guarantee, isn't it, or limited by shares?
I'm not sure whether we would become a charity or whether we just establish a charity.
What's
sort of ways moonshots into.
What's RISC OS Open limited by shares or guarantee?
Shares.
If it's limited by guarantee, you can convert it to a charity straight off.
Yeah.
I think you can buy your shares back and then.
Well, that wouldn't be hard because it's 50 quid each. It wouldn't be hard because it's about £50 each.
No, which I don't think the company can buy the shares back.
Yeah. Okay.
And of course, it can buy them back on paper.
Yes.
You don't have to
Notionally buy the book.
buy them back.
Yeah.
And then you could convert to being a company limited by guarantee.
Yes.
And then you can be a charity.
Yeah.
And that way you're not shunting money to another bank account and things like that.
Good. Right. Well, thank you for that. I've got.
And it's just, and the objects just become the first bit of the standard company incorporation.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you. If anyone wants to tell me more back at the stand, they can. Just one more question.
Right. Given the fact that the operating system itself is open source, surely it makes sense at this point in 2025 to have open source toolchain. Toolchain compiler.
Yeah. Yes, but so the only problem is ARM won't let us. The license is complicated and it's even more convoluted when you consider how many people have left and lost information. And you can't even engage with lawyers on the other side anymore because they don't want to speak to you because you're too small.
You try nicely.
Sorry?
You try nicely. I mean, I'm sure that is there somebody in ARM that would be someone to touch it because they like lawyers? Like I said, it's quite difficult. And the other problem is that the DDE is one of the main pieces of merchandise that RISC OS Open gets money from. And without that source of revenue, it's hard for us to even come to shows. So we need a certain amount of money coming in all the time in order to afford to just come to shows or buy some Raspberry Pis to donate to someone to help them with a project. So it's also, we've made it nearly as cheap as we can. And yeah, there might be a point where we say, let's just go the whole hog and just give it away for free and maybe even open source it. But that would hurt us. I don't think so. I think the increased numbers of developers you get would be long term beneficial. And it may be too late at this point, but had this been done a lot earlier, then you would have had the time of more people to get a system and start working on it.
Yeah.
Because I know it's only 30 quid or whatever, or maybe 50, I don't know, forget me, but it's like, oh crap, pay this now. And it will just turn off. It's just a barrier that people
It is a barrier, yeah.
That's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, Steve Barnum, Microsoft got one thing right. Developers.
Yeah, it's a virtuous circle, isn't it? It's you need developers to write the software, to attract the users, to spend the money, to pay the developers. So, yeah. Right. Well, thank you. Thanks, everyone.